I'm Sarah Wheeling and I run Corry Croft Nursery in the north of Scotland. In this brief introduction to biodiversity gardening, I'll explain the approach I take to protect biodiversity in my garden. I'm fortunate to have a large garden on a croft with abundant wildlife, and in this short tour around the garden I hope that I will encourage you to think about your garden and its wildlife and take some simple steps to make their home more welcoming. I grow a lot of vegetables and all my plants are grown without chemicals, so keeping the soil healthy is key to getting a good crop. Healthy soil locks in carbon, stores and purifies water, and is estimated to be home to nearly 1/4 of all species. We're unlikely to be able to see or identify many of these, but their work in our soil makes all other life possible. Our best known soil residents are the surface feeding and tunnelling earthworms, and an abundance of these indicates that our soil is in good health. Their casts help to cement soil particles and make nutrients available to plants. Like all of us, soil organisms would much prefer their home left undisturbed and would benefit from having food provided for them. Research conducted in gardens in Zurich, which was published in July 2019, found that to enhance soil functions, gardeners should increase plant diversity, avoid intensive management practices, apply compost and mulches, and avoid soil tilling. In the vegetable garden, that means resisting the temptation to dig or disturb the ground by constant weeding, and using manures or homemade compost to enhance fertility. My vegetable garden is now 15 years old. The soil is easily worked and it gives good crops. The worm tunnels ensure that it drains easily, and the high organic content means that it rarely requires watering. Perennial weeds aren't tolerated, but I'm increasingly relaxed about annual weeds. These are eradicated by herbicides from most arable farms, but are great insect plants and don't trouble larger vegetables, which can also be left to flower. Often the weeds draw birds into the vegetable beds, who feed on insect pests as well as the weed seeds. In winter I mulch the ground and cover it with black plastic. This protects it from the weather and stops weeds germinating. The worms then clear the soil for me. This low-intensity gardening style means the soil is a self-sustaining ecosystem. My plants are rarely troubled by pests, and if they are, predators rapidly move in. We planted the orchard soon after we bought the croft, and now it is mostly undisturbed. Like the woodland areas, it is home to abundant insects and arthropods and busy with birds. I rely on insects to pollinate my fruit and vegetables, and I know pollinating insects are in decline. Insects are at the centre of every food web, but they do have an image problem. They have complicated and secretive lives, and some are considered significant garden pests. So it can be difficult to quantify exactly how habitat loss and climate change is impacting on them. Many birds and mammals predate on insects, and even those that don't will feed on the seeds and fruits that they pollinate. Any deciduous tree will be pollinated by insects, and many particularly love willows. But evergreens are also useful as shelter and overwintering sites. Trees happily grow in groups, and a small thicket of different trees is more beneficial than a single lone specimen. Even small gardens can usually host a tree or incorporate a boundary hedge. We have a number of hedges, an old established beech hedge and ones we planted ourselves, including yew and field hedges. Each offers a different habitat. All have had nests. Some are good roosting sites for the winter, and bats forage along the field hedges for flying insects. Leaf piles and decaying wood can be left under hedges, and this makes good habitats for beetles and various insect larvae. A neat lawn does set off a flower bed, but it's a poor habitat if frequently mown, and a desert if treated with pesticides and herbicides. Left to grow a little, a lawn supports a lot of biodiversity, and this is because the soil is generally undisturbed and it has perennial plant cover. Indeed, you may be surprised at the number of perennial flowers which quickly appear, and many birds will appreciate any flowers which are allowed to seed. Grass strips left unmown are quickly colonised by a myriad of creatures and make good hunting grounds for birds and small mammals. To maintain the health of the lawn, you should cut long grass in late summer and remove the material to prevent it smothering the plants beneath. Lawns are valuable stores of carbon. Plant material will be taken down by deep tunnelling earthworms, whose casts you may find on your lawn. In autumn, any light fall of leaves on grass can be cleared away for you if you give the worms time to do their work. Perennial flower beds are better for biodiversity than annual bedding and vegetable beds because the soil is less disturbed and they're often densely planted. Planting lots of different plants will have a positive effect on soil fauna, insects and birds, particularly if you leave the plants to seed. Dense perennial planting is best for insects as it provides shelter. The plant roots will physically bind soil particles together and they secrete sugars which will feed the soil organisms and fungi. This will encourage a fungal-dominated nutrient system which continuously releases nutrients back to the plants. If you add mulches and you leave plant material to decompose, you will feed into this system, and this is why landscaping fabric should not be used in planted areas. Pollinating insects tend to favour simple open flowers, although you'll find a specialist for all flower shapes and sizes. Insects can be found flying at any time of the year. On sunny winter days, bees will emerge to forage and seek water. With a changing climate, having plants that provide a succession of flowers will mean there is always food available. In spring, early bulbs are a valuable source of nectar. In the autumn, I leave perennial plants to die naturally rather than tidy the garden. This protects the soil and provides winter nesting sites for insects. When I clear the beds in spring, I leave the woody material in piles to let the insects emerge. I don't want perennial weeds in my flower beds. However, as many are vital food plants for a number of insect larvae, they are left to grow around the croft. Red admiral, small tortoiseshell and peacock butterflies will only lay eggs on nettles growing in the sun. But troublesome weeds like dock and hogweed are important too, as they are seed plants for a number of garden birds. Digging a pond was one of the first things we did to deliberately attract wildlife. Ponds and puddles are ephemeral features in the landscape, and after 17 years this first pond is already silting up. Water is essential to all life and critical for the breeding success of amphibians and a number of invertebrates. In the natural landscape there are few ponds, and in the UK the number of ponds is in decline. Garden ponds now make a valuable contribution to the survival of amphibians and invertebrates requiring still water to complete their life cycle. To continue to enjoy pond life, we dug a second, small pond near the house with an extensive shallow shelf. Ponds can be any size and depth, but as many pond animals live in the top 10 centimetres of water, extensive shallow zones support more life. Good light is best for plants and animals, and easy access into and out of the pond is essential for visiting wildlife. Stones and logs make good perching sites, and nearby trees or shrubs can provide helpful cover for visiting birds. Some animals spend their entire lives in water, like water fleas and water snails, whereas others, like damselflies and dragonflies, spend the majority of their life in water before leaving the pond. Dragonfly nymphs can live for 4 years in a pond before emerging, only surviving a couple of months as an adult. This year our small pond has had 2 dragonfly nymphs emerge that we know of from the cases left behind. During the spring, the little pond hosts newts, and the larger pond is visited yearly by toads and frogs. To maintain a wildlife pond, it is essential that fish are not included, as they will feed on all other organisms. Fortunately, pond life arrives of its own accord, and birds and insects will visit to drink or feed. Adding pond plants gives cover and support for insects, and, as specialists, they will not be found in any other part of the garden. Look around, and you will see that you aren't alone in your garden. Our gardens, with their distinct zones, create a mosaic of habitats, potential ecosystems in miniature. UK gardens make a huge contribution to national biodiversity. but intense gardening practices can make them less attractive than they could be. I hope I've encouraged you to relax your gardening style, embrace biodiversity, and reap the benefits.